There we go. It looks like hey, there you are.
We're in.
We're finally. We should have. You're the ex-IT guy. We should have had you setting this whole thing up in the beginning.
X. Concentrate on the X.
Yeah, concentrate on the X. Well, good morning, good afternoon. You're in New York?
Yes.
So I guess it's good afternoon to you, Richard Zimmerman of Orangutan Outreach. So thanks for joining Apes Like Us and GLOBIO for another one of our Instagram live series. And thanks to everyone out there who's jumping on board. And I see your name scrolling up on the list below. So thanks for joining us for this one. And I'm really excited to talk to Richard today. This is, of course, International Orangutan Day, so it's a double celebration. Getting to talk to you about red apes and what you're doing, but also to celebrate this amazing day. So, one thing I wanted to ask you is, we did a little research and we couldn't figure out when was the first International Orangutan Day. Do you have any idea?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't even know. It's been not quite 10 years. Let's see, it's maybe 8 years, 7 years. It's one of these things that just, it was started almost on a lark a few years ago, and it's just sort of kept going. But yeah, maybe someone commenting will know the date. I think it was around 2012.
Anybody out there who happens to know, give us a heads up on that, because we went searching on the internet, we couldn't find anything popping up. So anyway, it's an important day to celebrate, an important day for all of us to try to figure out how to get involved. And you're the master at how to get involved. I mean, and maybe that's a great place to start, is that being the founder of Orangutan Outreach. In going back and looking at some previous interviews that you had done, and looking at your whole background, I mean, you really are. I think of you as a conservation hero in many, many ways, because you are, to me, you epitomize what all of us should be thinking about. It's like, you're not a primatologist, you're not a conservation scientist. You came at this like all of us do in many ways, and saying, what can I do to help? So fill us in a little bit on your background.
I love orangutans. There we go.
What's that?
In a way, it is. I've loved them since I'm a child, and I did not go into the field of biology. I loved Jane Goodall as a child, like everyone else, but I didn't pursue it. I went in other directions. But the love for orangutans has always been with me. It's an obsession. It's nonstop. As you can see behind me is my.
It is.
It's everywhere. It's on me.
We've got a few of them around here as well, so they populate all of our lives.
They're everywhere. But no, what I did is a lot of my background is international policy. I did a lot of IT work. I was in education for a while, and what happened was I realized that we'd always been talking about, they're on the verge of extinction. They could go extinct. We're losing the forests. And it hit me that this wasn't just words. I realized, oh my God, these orangutans who I adore are on the cusp of extinction. And so I tried to figure out a way to help. And, without, not being a very wealthy person, what could I do? And so at the time I offered skills to existing organizations, some of them are now our partners, now going on 13 years. And I went to Indonesia for the first time in 2006. And what I thought would be the lush jungle with orangutans and some sort of fantasy in my own head turned out to be devastation and destruction and burned out land and hundreds and hundreds of orangutans in cages. And it freaked me out. It depressed me. I couldn't sleep. And it was the worst thing I could have ever imagined. And what I did is I sort of said to myself, all right, at the time I was working at UNICEF, and the big campaigns we were working on were all about outreach. So I said, damn, the orangutans need outreach. And I realized, oh, that's some good alliteration. So we said, oh, I said, all right, let's try to create orangutan outreach. And I used my burgeoning IT skills of circa 2007 to get things going, and started supporting our first partner, who's the Borneo Orangutan Survival Foundation. And we joined up just in time for a TV show called Orangutan Island. And, that's very relevant because I'm dear friends with the executive producer of that series. And we've gone on to work together, and she sits on our board. Her name is Judith, and we love her to death. And she executive produced Orangutan Jungle School, which is currently airing all over the world.
Right.
Also filmed at Bosnia Rumentang. But what happened was I went to visit and realized I had to do more. Started an organization. It started slowly, but it grew and grew and grew, and it generates a great amount of funding for these projects. So we've made a difference over these years to save orangutans, to rescue, to rehabilitate, to release. Not without our ups and downs, of course, but we're still here. Which some days I'd say, "Oh my God, how is this still happening?"
Yes,
really.
in running a nonprofit, I understand exactly what you mean by that, and especially in interesting times like we're dealing with right now. It's been, I do want to interject that you said you've raised a lot of money. I mean, the last figure I heard was over 3 million.
Yeah, we're well over that. I think we're over 4 at this point.
Wow.
And the important thing is, I mean, obviously money is important to run these projects because there's so many mouths to feed and staffing and everything. But it's been consistent. And that's really one of the things that enables me to sleep at night. First and foremost, because I'm the crazy guy running the ship. Debbie works with me now, and she's watching us, I think. She handles a lot of the social media. I go crazy on the social media. I react very quickly and succinctly again, I'm in New York, so I have certain shall we say verbal tics that I have trouble containing. But,
well, especially in August, because all the psychiatrists go on holiday in August in New York. So I think everybody there has a few tics at this time of year.
At this time, given what we've gone through,
oh yeah,
anything goes.
But really, that's interesting. You say what you've gone through, and I guess that's why I brought this up and how you founded it, and thanks for that little background to it, because again, people always say, what can I do? I live here. I can't go off to Borneo or go off to Sumatra, and I can't volunteer or commit a couple of years of my life or something. And that's what I think is really extraordinary about what you have done and what you have done with Orangutan Outreach is you've done a masterful job of keeping your ego out of this, I think. I mean, you have really been committed to orangutans and not, you work with all these organizations. Your organization is not trying to steal the limelight and be the one that everybody understands or recognizes and throws all the money at. I mean, you've managed.
We would like that.
Yeah, of course. But you've managed to negotiate some pretty tricky waters. I mean, somebody once said to me, if we could just get conservation organizations to leave their logos and egos at the door, we could have a meeting and get something really done. And you've done a really masterful job at sort of leaving the logo and ego at the door and only bringing it in when you needed to, especially in the United States, I think. And and as a consequence, you do have all these partners in Borneo and Sumatra who you work with, you support, and they benefit from what you've been able to do.
Yeah, it hasn't been easy. It's crazy, managing all the relationships and making sure everyone is happy and no one is pissed off that someone saw this picture of this orangutan and then gave money for that there's a little maneuvering going on to make sure everyone's happy. But I find that, again, I don't want my ego in it. This is I don't even like talking in public. I've known you for a few years, so I'm like, okay, we can do this. But I try to keep myself behind the curtain. It's really about the orangutans. They're far more attractive than I am. You know, who wants to see this when you can see a cheek patter like Jojo? You know?
Right.
But really, it's about them. And, you know, as human beings, I think to a certain extent, we're all selfish creatures. But what I've really focused on and tried to do is make sure that that focus goes to the orangutans and the organizations in the field on the ground that are caring for them. Because again, I can do what I can do here in upstate New York, but ultimately it's in the fate of the orangutans is in the hands of these amazing people on the ground, people in Indonesia or also in Malaysia, but the people there need to care. They need to have an income. They need to be invested in the system. They need to want to save the orangutans. And my ego would not help that. You know, I have my own energy to push forward a message and marketing and the branding and such. But again, it wouldn't help. There are people who do similar things to what I do whose ego is off the charts, and they know who they are. It's crazy. It's mind-blowing when you think about it. It's like if you put yourself in the shoes of a donor or a supporter who just wants to help orangutans, we got to get away from this cult of personality. I mean, at every level in our society, no more cults of personality.
Right.
That's kind of it.
Well, speaking of projects and the things that you do, first of all, you know, anybody out there who has any questions, fire them away, and we'll try to answer them as we go along. And it's great. I can see names scrolling up and down, so it's great to see so many people joining us for today. But speaking of projects, I mean, I read in an interview, I think you did in about 2014 or something, and you were talking about, you know, your first goal is to try to get as many orangutans back in the wild, save the wilds as much as we can, get orangutans back into the wild. And fortunately, orangutans are one of the few large, great apes, and primates in general that you can put back in the wild, given the right opportunities. But there are a lot of orangutans that will never go back in the wild, that are in sanctuaries that have been injured in one way, you know, that their situation is just different. And I know that's something that you have been working really diligently at, because I think in the thing I read, it said something about comfort and dignity. Those were the two words that you used. And those seem to be words that have resonated throughout your career and your life, knowing orangutans in other things that I read about you. So talk to us a little bit about the project that you're working on, what you guys are doing with orangutans that can't be released.
Yeah, I mean, and everything you've just said, you kind of nailed it. You know, they're not objects. You know, these are living beings with a consciousness and good days and bad days, and we don't want to rescue them so they can sit in a cage. That's the last thing anybody wants. And it's just heartbreaking to rescue an orangutan and have him or her have to sit in a cage for years and years and years, maybe die in that cage. And, you know, orangutan outreach has been around long enough now. You know, we were founded when did I start? In 2007. So it's been around long enough so that some of the orangutans we rescued a long time ago are still in cages. And I lose sleep every night over it. You know, Pingky is one of our famous, beautiful ladies who we rescued her so long ago. She's still in a cage. So what we're doing, you know, each project on the ground has a slightly different scenario in terms of physical space, access to wild forest, how they're rehabilitating in the sense of, you know, whether they're rehabbed locally or whether they're in a forest. And so each project, and I'm really speaking mainly in Borneo of the Boss Foundation and International Animal Rescue, and in Sumatra, I'm speaking mainly of SOCP, because they're the ones running these big projects with so many orangutans of every size, shape, and personality imaginable. And in SOCP's case, what Dr. Ian Singleton is doing is he's building, or he's essentially built a conservation space called the Orangutan Haven. And so the unreleasable orangutans that they care for in Sumatra will go there to live on little islands, but no cages, no ceiling, so they can at least see the sky, where they'll be cared for with dignity and respect and comforted for the rest of their lives, because they can live long lives. An orangutan can, I think, live into their 60s. Maybe,
right.
It varies. But in Borneo, the situation is a lot more complex. In Sumatra, it's not easy, but there's fewer orangutans. Excuse me. In Borneo, you have different organizations in different provinces dealing with different subspecies, and there's a lot of puzzle pieces to move around and make sure everyone's in the right place and who goes where and who can mix. And in a case like Boss, you have more than 100 adult male orangutans, these beautiful, handsome cheek patters, and they all just can't go onto an island and hang out together.
Right.
If there's a female around, they're going to fight. If there's not enough food, they're going to fight. It's just, again, they're orangutans. You can't forget that.
And I think one of the things that's been really, I think, was eye-opening to me when I first started working in Borneo and filming there was the fact that I think I was at Carmeli's place in West Kalimantan at IAR, and looking at the enclosures that she has, a couple of males that can never go back in the wild, and the size and the strength of those enclosures was extraordinary. I mean, when you think, it really brought home how powerful these big males are. And I think that gets lost on people too, when they think, well, first of all, I mean, none of us like to see them in cages, but when you do have to utilize some kind of cage facility, it has to be incredibly powerful and strong. Plus, you're dealing with an animal that is, it's the heaviest arboreal mammal on the planet. So it wants to be up off the ground. So you have to build, and in the case of those enclosures, I know they're probably 40 feet, 50 feet high. So that
they have vertical space. But it's
so they have that vertical space.
We think of it as a condo, I guess, as opposed to a condo of cages, because there's vertical space, there's movement. They obviously get great nutrition, great medical care, enrichment, and they have companions if the situation warrants. You have groups of ladies who are all together. But it is a tricky situation. You want them off the ground, obviously, so they're in raised cages. But ideally, they're moved onto islands or into giant enclosures. And what Boss does, which is pretty amazing, is they have access to islands where they do the rehabilitation of the younger orangutans. And sometimes some of the bigger orangutans who are unreleasable will be able to spend time on those islands. And they're smart. They understand who's caring for them. They understand often which is the hand that feeds.
Right.
So they know how to play the game. But there are ultimately going to be hundreds of them. What Boss has done at their Samboja facility and hopefully soon with the Nyarumenteng facility in central Kalimantan is man-made islands. They won't be huge, but they'll be forested and they'll be outdoors. And our hope is that some of these cheek patters will be able to go onto the islands to get out of the cages. And it's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of space and a lot of work. But just to get back to Carmeli, that's something that we've been working on now she and I have been talking about it for a decade. But it's finally starting to happen. Is what IAR is doing, and we're honored to help. Is they're building out 1 acre forested enclosures. So that's it's like a football field essentially, of forested space for these unreleasable adult orangutans to go into. And it's to be determined how they go in. It'll be through a chute system, much like you have in the sanctuaries in North America, like at the Center for Great Apes, our dear friend, shout out to Patty Reagan. So those orangutans who are unreleasable will have access, maybe 24-hour access, we don't know, but access to these giant outdoor spaces. So they'll get out of the cages and into the spaces. And it'll be a much better life. They'll have space. The orangutans want privacy. They want to be in the trees. They want to do their thing. and what our big highlight right now for International Orangutan Day has been promoting this amazing cheek batter named Jojo. And again, they're all amazing. So, I run out of superlatives to talk about.
Right. Right.
But basically, Jojo, I happen to be on that rescue. I've been there, almost yearly for the last decade. But again, my role is here, raising money for them to do the work. But I happen to be there when Carmeli rescued Jojo. And, it's just heartbreaking because he's such a beautiful orangutan, and he'd had such poor nutrition that he doesn't have full access to he can't move his legs 100%.
Right.
He's still beautiful and powerful and strong and moves around, but he wouldn't be able to survive in the wild. He wouldn't know. So, he's been sitting there, and he grew up, he was little, and then they reach the phase where their cheeks start to move a little, and the beard comes down, and then all of a sudden you walk out there one day and boom. So Jojo will go into one of these enclosures. If I have my way, which Carmeli will probably, slap me, Pingky goes in the other, my beloved Pingky. They'll be the king and queen of Ketapang. But again, Carmeli's the boss.
Maybe there's a movie there, The King and Queen of Ketapang.
Exactly. And then the birth control will fail, and then
Uh-oh. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, we'll get people writing in. Speaking of writing in, I see that there's people joining from literally all over the world. I saw some folks, Gerry or something from UK, and
who's this crazy person?
So it's great to see everybody who's jumping on board with us. Talk about a little bit about the candidates that go for release. What kind of criteria, like you were mentioning? I mean, some of them, they move to islands. There's a process. This is not just one day all of a sudden you release an orangutan. It's you move them out. I just saw Carmeli a year ago, and her whole new setup for babies with surrogate moms. She became, as she became rather famous for putting these babies into wheelbarrows, and then that became this gigantic kind of viral attraction of.
Hey, Boss was doing that years ago,
and it just drove her crazy, though. I mean, It's like everybody who came there, every film crew that came there, wanted to photograph these babies in wheelbarrows, and it was like the last thing in the world, because what it meant, of course, was that there were too many babies. And they couldn't.
It's tragic. We smile, but we're crying. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and she just kept saying, if people would just get it through their heads that every one of those babies means a disaster in the forest, a mother that's died, been burnt in the fires, whatever. And now she's gone to this surrogate mother system where they've got some of the females who may not be able to go back in the wild, or some that could be candidates, but there'll be small babies that go with them, and they start building up these relationships to go back.
We have a great example of this.
Go ahead.
When we first started working with IAR back in 2009, and when we rescued Jojo, one of the babies, I think there were 5 orangutans when it first got going at Ketapang, and one of those babies was Monty. This teeny tiny, cutest, again, they're all cute, they're all adorable, we love them. But Monty was just breathtaking, and we put her in the adoption program, and she's had supporters through our adoptions for a decade, and she grew up, and she had been coddled as one of the early babies, and so Carmeli didn't know if Monty would really be tough enough to go wild, but the instincts kicked in. Monty grew up, turned into a perfect candidate, and Carmeli put baby Angun, adorable little new little guy, with Monty. We tell the story on our website, redapes.org/Monty goes wild, or something fun like that. And as Monty spent more time with the baby, it's like her own maternal instincts kicked in. Fascinating, and someone should do a doctoral thesis on it. And eventually Monty and the baby went wild. So somewhere out there now in Bukit Raya National Park, Monty, a rescued orangutan, is trudging around in the trees with baby Angun. It's a fascinating, it's one of the few positive stories we have, because most of what we deal with is death and destruction and deforestation. But Monty and baby Angun was this perfect example of wow, you can almost match them up.
Well, that's what was so fascinating. You know, when Carmeli and she was showing me some of the work they're doing around the surrogate mother approach, and they had actually gotten in a small baby that had spent enough time being wild, and they had an orphan mom who had grown up there, or
Yes.
not mom, but potential mother, and the wild baby was actually influencing her. Which was this orphan that was now, you know, she was 9 years old, 10 years old, or something like that, you know, a candidate for release, and hopefully soon. But yeah, that whole pairing, and like you said, there's a doctoral thesis there. I'm sure somebody wanted to, you know, invest and get going with it. But yeah. So going back to the candidate question, like, what are there a handful of things that you would say are prime for an orangutan that's now available to go back in the wild, that it shows, like it says, you know, I've done, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things. Okay, now I'm ready to go. I mean, what are those kinds of things for somebody who's never been in that situation?
And it's been this whole system of rehabilitation has been going long enough now, so that it's well tested in terms of skill sets and these sorts of things. So it's now based on a lot of anecdotes, you know. You know, when they're ideally there's no you know, they're all safe in the forest, but the ones who come in, they go into, you know, just using Boss as the reference point. They start with, you know, nursery school or baby school, and they're all, you know, they get 24-hour care when they're tiny, the way they would you know, had they been with their mothers in the wild. And as they get a little older, they move into what's called forest school, and they're socialized together, which is rare. Another doctoral thesis at some point. And they grow up, and they learn from each other. They have various, you know, in any cohort of young orangutans, there's some that had more skills developed in the wild with their mother, and some that had fewer. And so you always have these beautiful, I mean, these moments of them learning and teaching each other, which is what the show Orangutan Jungle School is about. The series just depicts this. And they, you know, they learn what to eat. They learn how to forage. You know, the Boss babysitters or the IAR babysitters or the SSCP babysitters teach them and show them, and they learn. You know, you thank God for instinct, because, you know, it goes in and something clicks. And they learn from each other, and they learn from older orangutans. And what happens is their instinct is to get off the ground. They go into the trees, and, you know, and they realize that there's, you know, if their forest school is in the real forest, you know, again, within the boundary of a center, there's better fruit up in the trees than what they get as their snack. So they have more desire to go into the canopy. And they develop relationships with each other, and they move in groups, and basically they become orangutans. They move from just being these cute little almost plush toys. They turn into real orangutans who have these skill sets, and they learn how to build nests. And there's these great stories of them learning, and some a little slower than others. You know, they swing and they fall, you know, and again, it's like human kids learning how to play. And so basically, as they get a little older, they move on to islands. And this is also the age where they get a lot stronger, and they learn that they can fight the ladies that are caring for them, and they can take the basket and overturn it and take all the food and run, you know, so they basically become, I guess, junior high schoolers. You could call
and, out of control teenagers.
Yeah, exactly. And then they hit puberty, and then it's out of control, and they're on the islands, and they're big groups. And I like to think of it sometimes as Lord of the Flies, but I don't even know if that reference makes sense anymore.
It does.
But they're out there, and they spend more and more time without humans. And they're on the islands, and they're on their own. You know, again, there's humans making sure they're eating and making sure they're not terrorizing each other too much, just to keep things at least semi-sane. But they just spend more time out there, and they mentally rewild, and they get to a point where the Boss observers, for instance, or at any center are able to really go down this checklist and say, all right, he or she has been able to do this. So they can do the nest, they can swing around, they're out, they're happy to go out there. They don't want to come in. They don't want to be near the humans, which is good because the next human they see in the wild might not be their friend.
Right.
And once then of course the medical tests are all done to make sure that, God forbid, they had some human-borne illness, to make sure they're all 100% clean to go back into the wild. And then the releases are scheduled in groups, and again, BOSS has larger numbers of individuals, so they're bigger groups that go out, sometimes a dozen of them. Carmeli's group, usually a smaller group because they have smaller numbers, but then they'll be taken out as a release, and they'll be chipped so they can be followed through GPS, and then teams will stay with them in the forest. And again, IAR and BOSS are brilliant about employing local villagers in the release areas to get them to have stakes in the system, and everybody wants it to work, and it's their land anyway, so you want them involved.
Yeah. I think that, and that's really important, I think, for people who are tuning in and listening to this whole, I think it's really, it's important for people to realize in that whole release process that you can't just, even if you have a prime piece of land, and that's a problem in Borneo too, with palm oil and the fires in the last several years that have been a huge problem, destroying potential release habitat. But even if you have a secure habitat, you also have to go in ahead of time and do big surveys to see what's the orangutan population that's already there. You can't just insert these individuals into a place in which orangutans have a territory, because they'll be forced out. And I know in some situations, both in Sumatra and in Borneo, that's been a problem where individuals, it made me think of it as you talking about the GPS tracking, is they would see individuals being pushed to the perimeters of these release areas, and then often on the perimeter would be a palm oil plantation. So now you have that individual coming in conflict with the palm oil plantation, and then you've got to re-rescue them again.
Yeah, you don't want to see them again. That's the irony. You just want them out there happy and healthy and reproducing. And again, we've been doing this long enough that BOSS is finally, under Jamartin, they've been doing a tremendous amount of releases. It's phenomenal. And Jamartin's the CEO of BOSS, in case anyone wonders who Jamartin is. But he's really gotten this release program going. So there's so many that have gone out, they've started reproducing. So that's the best sign of all, that there's a successful release program, is when you have these rescued orangutans who grew up in a rescue center, who are released, who then have a baby and raise that baby wild. So again, this is longitudinal research. We have to keep an eye on all of it.
Speaking of that, I see that we have a question from Bruce, who has asked, what's the percentage of releases that is increased over time, or is it decreased over time? Do you have any information on that?
The releases has increased, and it's been going up big time up until this freaking virus struck. It was really, really going strong. Regular intervals, again, funding permitting, and being able to line up all the pieces. And, it's driven Jamartin mad trying to line everything up to get these, get a dozen orangutans out.
So let me ask you, there's two questions. Sorry, go ahead. What were you going to
the releases have gone up. And what's happened is, BOSS has been operating in East and Central Kalimantan and with various release sites, and IR has been in West Kalimantan, and the two of them have been using this gigantic park called Bukit Baka, Bukit Raya, and it's phenomenal when you see the footage of this place. I've seen a teeny corner of it, and so there's more space to keep it going. But now the problem is the virus, because the virus stopped all operations, essentially. Because God forbid there is a COVID case in a center, the last thing you would ever want is to, inadvertently infect a wild population with anything. But it's just, there's too much unknown.
Yeah, that's where one of the questions was going to go was, has COVID, I know we've been in contact with a few folks there about, how things have impacted them, just the price of medical supplies, masks going up. There's been a lot of pressure, but maybe you can shed some light on some of the things that you know about that, how COVID has affected them in Borneo and Sumatra, not just in releases, but just in general operations.
Yeah, absolutely. Fortunately, there are no COVID cases among the orangutans, although we suspect that they're susceptible because they're susceptible to the cold, the flu, the TB, hepatitis. So the suspicion is it could affect them, but fortunately, we're not dealing with that. But what the centers have had to do is reduce their staff. Because we're concerned about the humans,
Right.
to make sure people are safe. And so you've had staff reduction, which, in a case like Boss, you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of orangutans, and they all need to be fed, they all need to be enriched. It's a big operation. With IAR, I think there's about 100 there now. Ian,
right,
is probably pushing up towards 100. But you need to be careful with the human element. So we have staff reductions, less hours put in at the center, so it becomes tricky to make sure all the work gets done. You have, of course, the price of PPE, because just as it was off the charts in New York and New Zealand and everywhere, in the middle of Borneo, where it's already sometimes difficult to secure materials, the prices skyrocketed. You had price gouging, you had, everything that happens anywhere in an epidemic or pandemic. The price of food started fluctuating. And, we're not just talking about $100. We're talking, food for hundreds of orangutans every day. And while it's Borneo and it's a lot cheaper than it is in New York, it all adds up. And then, that's where an organization like Orangutan Outreach can really step up and do fundraising drives to just get additional funds to the projects to make sure to cover these deficits. But, in addition, some of the projects have volunteer programs throughout the year, no touching, no contact, but volunteers go in and they work on enrichment. They help build out facilities. They do things where you don't cuddle orangutans, to be clear.
Right.
But that's income that's lost. And, so year to year, an organization like BOSS had been counting on that, X number of volunteers paying to go to help. So that's a loss of revenue. There's generally just uncertainty, and then it freaks people out. Everybody's had to be sheltering in place, and when you're at home, not able to go into an office, and and again, these are rescue centers, but these rescue centers also have office operations where you have the people who deal with communications and deal with government issues and deal with normal office stuff, business stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's all affected. And basically that's the team that supports this team on staff, the staff at the center rather. And so it's almost like the whole train gets stopped. And then, you wonder, how long is this going to continue? We don't know. And we really we don't know. I did an interview back in February where at one point I stopped and I think I said the date just so you sound like, so we could look back and say, oh, wow, this is what we were thinking in February. Meanwhile, here you and I are in, mid-August, and we still don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with winter. And it's daunting. And when you think about having to make sure you have the funding in place to care for hundreds of orangutans who may not be able to be released for whatever reason, and then you all of a sudden have fire season coming. So we may have to deal with catastrophic fires again. So it's, again, if we had hair, we would pull it out. It's like,
I think we both did. That's why we're in the state that we're in. Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we're right on the cusp of fire season there. Yeah. So, fingers crossed that that's not going to be an issue. There was a question that popped across a couple of minutes ago, and it was asking about locals they do hire a lot of people. There are a lot of local people employed in all of these situations, whether it's at SOCP or, you know, Carmeli's place or at Boss. In your experience, how supportive have locals been? Not just the people who are employed, but I mean, in general, the awareness of locals to the orangutan situation in Borneo and Sumatra, to their supportiveness or lack of support, both financially and just, you know, kind of ethically and morally. How would you describe it?
Again, I don't have firsthand knowledge because I'm so far away. But what I can say is that these projects employ local people, almost exclusively local people. You know, to whatever extent imaginable, local people are brought in as either babysitters or the technicians, or they're trained up to But the local people are brought into the project in a way that, you know, you want inclusivity. You want the people to love the orangutans and love the project. You know, is everyone happy? No. But I think, especially in these remote areas, IAR and BOSS especially work with the local villages, and these are very remote areas, and they want to make sure that there's medical attention for the humans. You know, you want to make sure that people have a good situation. You know, you don't want them to have to cut down a tree to sell, to save, to get money to go to a doctor. You don't want them, you know, you want everyone involved. Again, you're dealing with situations where the easy out for many people is to just sell off to oil palm. You know, and again, it's easy for us to sit here outside and point a finger, but we're not living there. We're not in it. And, you know, if we're ever allowed to go back, we ultimately get back on a plane and leave, which is a whole nother issue. But from what I've seen, there's a lot of buy-in. You know, there's a lot of interest. I can tell you that the centers, you know, like a center like Bosnia Romentang or IR Ketapang, they buy a lot of fruit and a lot of vegetables. The farmers, they keep the farmers busy. They keep the farmers in business. And you also have an amazing, you know, a big workforce. You know, IAR now has a giant conservation center. You know, and again, putting the whole COVID thing aside, hopefully forever, you're dealing with a lot of people, and these people go eat, they go have a tea or a coffee. It's an economy, just like anywhere else. These are local areas, the remote areas. You know, these aren't big urban centers. SOCP is a little different because their main facility is in Medan, in an urban center. But with IAR and BOSS, they're more or less remote, and you know, it's like whatever they're doing, they're bringing funds into the local economy, and I think that's a very good thing. You know, for some of the, again, BOSS Narrowhentang has been there for so many years now, decades, that you've had generations of people growing up with it. So the people who grow up and their children can now work there. So it's become part of the landscape in a way.
Well, and it's been really fascinating. And we only have a few more minutes left, and a couple of things I want to ask you. But I think one of the things that I've been fascinated by in working with folks there on the ground is this transition that's gone on over the last decade or so between just purely being rescue centers, like just reaching out, saving an orangutan, bringing it back, trying to get it healthy enough, hopefully, to go back and watch, to this shift to becoming conservation organizations. They really, there's so much more emphasis put on. I mean, I remember Carmeli saying to me once, she said, "I will be so happy the day I can shut the doors and we don't have another baby arrive."
Yeah.
And I said, "So then you can relax." He goes, "Oh no, there's so much conservation work to do," and that has increased over time. I mean, she's become, in her case, she's become less a vet and more the director of a conservation, you know, orangutan rescue organization. So there is a lot of work to be done because of so much destruction over the last couple of decades. Yeah. So.
And there's a need to regrow forest. You know, we work with Borneo Nature Foundation, who operate in Palangkaraya, right right near Boss, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And they have an amazing campsite. Their whole operation is in the forest. And
Right.
had they not been there, that forest would be long gone. That's for sure. But what they do is work with the local villages, and it's a forest regeneration program. So we're having to think really far out.
And I mean, the beauty of the forest, I mean, Borneo in particular, I mean, it's a 80+ million-year-old, rainforest, and given half a chance, it will regenerate. And, some of the tree planting programs, we're working with Carmeli on something called the Orangutan Tree Project, and it's a seedling project and trying to get in thousands of seedlings into the ground in areas that were burnt a few years ago in the 2015 fires. And, those are the kinds of things that go on where if you can just get the force ticked back into gear, it will take care of itself.
Yeah.
And you'll not only have a place to put orangutans back into there, but you have all the other species, proboscis, monkeys, and whatever else. So yeah, there's huge effort, even if we were rescuing orangutans in all of this. So I noticed that a few people have adopted, I saw a Pingky adoption just fly by there. So I just want to point out that redapes.org is if you're not familiar, if you came to us through our Apes Like Us program on this Instagram, you can also check out everything that Richard and everybody are doing at redapes.org. We'll have a link on our site as well, and we'll have that stuff go up in the show notes on the YouTube piece that we create around this as well. But any last few minutes that we have here, anything else you want to chat about in terms of what you guys are doing and what's happening in the next few months, year?
Well, again, we're working towards sanctuary space, and hopefully with a let up or an ease of the COVID situation, we can move forward with that. And again, just shouting out to anyone watching, the orangutan adoptions really keep all this going. After 12 years, we finally raised the price, so now they're $15 a month.
Which is really ridiculous if you think about it. Yeah.
For $15 a month, you adopt an orangutan. We have too many in the program. We have like 500 in the program now. Not seriously. I think there's like 20 in the program now.
Yeah.
And you basically pay your monthly fee. You get online access to adopt. What we have now, babies, we have cheek patters, we have old ladies who we love to death. So we have a whole variety of orangutans in the adoption program. And it's been going strong since 2007. Blows my mind.
Yeah, and the adoption, I want to plug the older folks there. The adoption of the older orangutans is really important. I mean, it's easy to fall in love with those, as you said, they look like little plush toys. So it's easy to, I think we've got one hiding up here, actually, these little guys here, they're really easy to adopt and love, but it's the older, bigger ones. And unfortunately, no cheek pads on there, but because especially those who can't be released, there's a lot of medical care that goes into geriatric apes. They have, if you think of all of the things that go into taking care of humans as they get older, they suffer with dementia. They suffer with, their bones brittle.
Diabetes. They get cataracts.
All kinds of things. And in fact, when I saw, when we were filming with Carmeli last time, she was showing me they're doing all this research into malaria, and some of the malarias are specific to orangutans, and they're looking at those that might even be specific to some of the orangutans that are in long-term care. Yeah. So all of that has to be faced. So when you're out there thinking of adopting, maybe think of adopting one of the older ones as well.
I often joke because one of the babies, who's not a baby anymore, but he's cared for at Ketapang, his name's Gunung, and he's got this angelic face. I mean, again, for me, crazy me, they're all angels. But for Gunung, that photo went around the world. And so he has so many adoptive parents. But I sit there and it drives me mad because I'm like, it's not fair. He's so cute that it's like other orangutans don't get adopted. Right. And this is what keeps me up at night is how do we We need the revenue. We need to keep giving IR funds, but Gunung is like too cute. Like maybe we'll use an ugly photo, but there's no ugly photos.
Well, since they keep you up at night, you're going to need to get some extra rest. So I'm going to let you go. And I just really want to thank you so much for taking the time today. It was actually a little bit of short notice to get a hold of you, and we'll do this again.
Totally.
Hopefully we can do one of these live from Borneo or something at some point in the future.
Hopefully we can go to Borneo.
Yeah, exactly. But again, it's redapes.org. If you haven't been on, jump on the site and see everything that Richard and everyone are doing. Thank you so much for being here today. And thanks for all the folks who followed us on Instagram Live today. I kept seeing it scroll up and down. So we had a lot of folks that were joining us, and it was really great pleasure to have all of you there. Again, we will recut this, add some B-roll and some other images, and it will be up on the YouTube site. So we'll share that with you for your site as well. And so everybody can see that there. Okay.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Richard, happy
International
International Orangutan Day. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.